God's Gun by S.P. Dorning. The gun lay quietly next to his Bible, not saying anything, but calling to Randall Guthrie just as sure as if it was the devil himself. Randall had been a very temperamental man in his youth, prone to drinking and fighting. He'd been known as the fastest gun in these parts for a long time. It wasn't a time that he was fond of recalling. He had been a different man then. Back then he had been a man that was ridden by demons and driven to ruin the lives of others. Then God had called him to preach the word and changed his life forever. He had never regretted the choice, but today had a different feel to it. Today was a dangerous day, and the temptation to pick up the gun and strap it on was very strong. It was almost too strong. There was another man in town. He had ridden in the day before yesterday and spent the day hanging around the Old Dog Saloon. His name was Alan Langley, and he was set on proving himself as a fast gun. Some of Randall's parishioners had heard him bragging about how he was going to start his career here. Randall wasn't sure, but from the way the man had eyed him as he walked through town yesterday, he was pretty sure Mr. Langley had heard some of the old stories of Randall's gunfighting days. The gun kept calling to him throughout his morning prayers. He knew a run-in with Langley was inevitable, and it weighed on his heart like a heavy stone. It was a dreadful feeling, and rested in his stomach and chilled his bones, draining his strength away. Had this been the way other men had felt about him? He had changed his ways and done so much over the last 5 years to try and make up for the old Randall, but now it seemed that his tab had come due. It had been a wonderful 5 years, worth so much more than those he had spent as a brigand. Once again, Randall found himself in his bedroom. He had put off going to town as long as he dared. Old Widow Johnston was in a sorry state, and Doc Brown had blatantly stated that she wouldn't make it through the day. It was his duty as a parson to go and check in with her. The gun glinted in the light next to the black leather-covered Bible. With a sigh, Randall made his choice and moved toward the table. Alan Langley downed the liquid fire from the shot glass as he sat at the bar of the Old Dog Saloon. He had known that Randall Guthrie had settled here in the valley. The man was almost a legend in the parts where Alan had grown up. It had been a hard decision to come here, but he had to start somewhere. If he was going to make a name for himself, he had better get started. He was almost 18 now, and time was wasted. He did regret that the man was a preacher now. According to the locals, he had been a man of God for the last 5 years. That didn't make no never mind to Alan. He glanced out the window as he ordered another shot. That was when he saw the preacher coming down the street. "Hold that drink, Jimmy. I'll be back in a minute," he said. The preacher man stopped as he saw Alan step out onto the street. Good. That let Alan know that the man expected a fight. He was probably strapping iron under that frock coat right now. He had heard all the stories of Randall Guthrie. Alan had studied them to try and prepare for this moment. He knew that Guthrie was left-handed. Randall's left hand hung free, but he clutched an old worn-out book in his right hand up close to his chest. Alan's hands went slick with sweat, and he felt that old familiar tingle in his stomach as he wondered if he was fast enough to take this man. "Stop right there, preacher," Alan drawled out. "I ain't looking for trouble, son," Randall called out. "But I am, old man. I gotta make a name for myself, and I ain't getting any younger," Alan called back. "Son, you really don't want to go down this road. It's a lonely road, and it leads straight to hell. Just go on back in the bar, and we'll pretend none of this ever happened." "I'm through talking, old man." A crowd had gathered as the two men had squared off. Randall looked at their faces, and despair settled onto his frame like a physical weight. Alan was playing to the crowd now. There would be no way to talk him down. What happened in the next few moments was a blur for everyone that stood watching the scene in the dusty street of their little town. The events were a blur, but the outcome would change them forever. The sun beat down on the two men, and sweat began to form on their brows. Some say that what Randall Guthrie was doing was just wiping sweat out of his eyes. But as his left hand moved, Alan drew down, and the sound of thunder erupted from the 6-gun now gripped in his hand. Immediately after that, a second shot echoed the first. Allen blinked as the crimson stains spread out around the bullet hole that had suddenly appeared in his side. Then the pain hit, and his brain shut down as he crashed to the street in a heap. The preacher also lay, unmoving in the dust of the street. The eyes of the crowd turned to the tall man that stepped down from the sidewalk and walked over to check on Allen Langley. As he walked, he sheathed the smoking gun that he had gripped in his hand. "Langley's alive if someone wants to get the doc," the stranger said. Then he turned and walked over to check on Randall. "Who are you, mister?" someone in the crowd yelled out. "I'm a U.S. Marshal, Jack Ramsey," the man replied to no one in particular as he checked on the preacher. Ramsey squatted down and picked up the book Randall had been clutching. He smiled and shook his head as he looked at it. A bullet hole had penetrated the O in holy, and there was no exit hole. The bullet had been stopped by the pages of the book. Randall groaned as Ramsey opened the book to the last page where the bullet had stopped. He turned to the crowd and with a wry grin read the verse that had been underscored by the imprint of the bullet. And when he saw their faith, he said to them, "Man, your sins are forgiven. Go get the doc. Your preacher needs some tending." And the verse that was quoted was Luke 5, verse 20.